World Health Organization has urged smokers not to touch a cigarette or pipe on this World No Tobacco Day. The health body has urged the youth to make a firm decision never to smoke, not even one puff. The Global Adult Tobacco Survey reveals that 3 in 10 South African adults use tobacco or related products, and that about 4.5 trillion cigarette butts are discharged into the environment every year. Joining us to discuss the intervention strategies that have been put in place against smoking is Dr. Sharon Nyatsanza, the Deputy Director at the National Council Against Smoking. Dr. Sharon, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. How severe is the situation of smoking in South Africa? One, on the health, but two, also on the environment.
So yes, we actually have a tobacco epidemic in South Africa. Our latest states show that over 26,000 people die every year from tobacco-related illnesses. But the survey that was launched today, the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, shows that the problem is even getting bigger. The survey finds that about 25% of South Africans actually smoke. And before that, we were at about 20 to 22%. But now 1 in every 4 adults, that is above 15 according to this survey, above 15 years of age, is now they basically use cigarettes. And we see then that the problem is only getting worse. So it really is a public health scare, and government really needs to urgently tighten down to control tobacco. But the theme for World No Tobacco Day this year is trying to show us that tobacco is not only a public health issue, but it basically affects almost every aspect of our lives. It also is, an environmental issue as well. So tobacco, the entire life cycle of it, is an overwhelmingly polluting process. So from growing, we're talking about deforestation, erosion, even until post-consumption, we're talking about a lot of littering, with cigarette butts being the most littered plastic item in the world.
Yeah, cigarette butts being the most littered item in the world. What is keeping government from tightening the regulatory measures? I mean, is the tobacco lobby that strong?
So it is that strong, and what we do see not only in South Africa but globally is that tobacco industry interference is actually the biggest obstacle to stronger tobacco control measures. So obviously they try to delay, they try to oppose. In other countries, we've seen they even try to destroy the tobacco control plans that are put in place, and that really is, it really is a big drawback. But definitely, great political will can still overcome that. As long as government needs to understand that its interests and the tobacco industry's interests are not, are not the same. They are irreconcilable. The interest of the tobacco industry is commercial. They need to sell more of the products. They need to, basically, that means they need to addict more people to nicotine. And government needs to know that its interest really is public health and should be public health, and they need to prioritize that.
Have you reaped any benefits, for example, from limiting the advertising of tobacco products on public spaces?
So definitely. So what we do see in South Africa is that since 1993, we had about 32% of South Africans smoking. And that actually was reduced to about 20 to 22% because of the strong tobacco control laws that were implemented at that time. And those included, restricting advertising. They included the first health warnings that we still see, the text health warnings. And they also included even trying to restrict the smoking areas. That's why we saw, for example, smoking rooms being put in place in restaurants. And we did see a drastic fall in tobacco use at that period, showing that, tobacco control does work. And I think simultaneously at that period, we did see an increase in taxation as well, 1993 to 1994. And we saw that it did work. But what happens with tobacco control is that it can be stagnant because the industry itself as well is not stagnant. It will keep looking for new ways, it will keep exploring new gaps. That is why we really are advocating for a more comprehensive tobacco control measure, tobacco control policy, because as long as you leave gaps, there still is a way for the industry to keep pushing the product. So definitely we did see benefits, but now if stronger laws are not put in place, we risk undoing all those, undoing the progress.
Do we need to strike a balance? Is there room to strike a balance as far as tobacco is concerned I'll tell you why. Because, particularly in developing countries on the continent, some tobacco farms are the biggest employers of the unemployed, and a huge source of revenue for particular countries on the continent. How do you strike that balance?
So what we see, interestingly, is that tobacco companies have moved now more and more from the developed countries to the developing countries. And the reason why they've moved away from the developed or the Western countries is because of the tighter and tighter tobacco control measures that they've put in place. And those countries like, for example, New Zealand, Australia, they've seen the smoking rates go down below 10% in terms of adults, and even below 5% for the youth. But the tobacco companies are now coming to countries like continents like Africa, countries like South Africa, because there's a potentially untapped market. Firstly, there are weaker tobacco control laws, but also there's a growing population. So what we see, for example, in South Africa, is that the tobacco industry brings in about 14 billion rand in taxation every year, sometimes lower. And government actually is spending 42 billion rand in treating the health, the diseases linked to smoking, in lost productivity, and in premature death as well. So what we see in terms of is there really striking a balance? We do not believe so. I don't think there's any way the public interest can be in the same. We can talk about public interest and tobacco industry interest in the same room. We've seen how this industry has been controlled and restricted in more developed countries, and we believe that the developing countries should really be cautious about the tobacco industry narrative.
Yeah. Are you pushing hard as well on the electronic delivery systems of tobacco, which are becoming a little bit more popular, and how difficult is it to navigate that space?
So with the electronic cigarettes, they do not contain tobacco. They contain nicotine. But we still see that the major tobacco companies are still actually also the owners of the e-cigarette. They're also the people who are mainly owning the e-cigarette market. And the concern there is that if this area is not regulated, we see more and more young children, non-users, adolescents starting to use e-cigarettes. And once they do, they are 3 times more likely, according to a recent study, 3 times more likely to actually progress to using tobacco. So that actually, and it basically undoes the whole process. So what we really are pushing for is not for the banning of e-cigarettes, but for the strict regulation of e-cigarettes, including and especially their marketing. Because when the marketing is targeted at the youth, and it actually, it results in initiation of the youth with a problem, because we're basically creating a new generation of addicts. We're not solving a problem, we're just perpetuating the problem.
Yeah. So what are you calling for? Pre-market evaluation, no marketing, labeling, packaging, and so forth? Are you calling for those to be looked at?
So we're definitely calling for those to be looked at. In terms of marketing, it has to be restricted because we have to balance out, like you say, trying to strike the balance. We have adult users who want to use e-cigarettes, but we also have to stop the young ones from starting. So we're talking about labeling. Currently, there's no appropriate labeling. Users are unaware of exactly what is in e-cigarettes. We're talking about the use of flavors, for example, which is one of the key drivers of youth use. What kind of flavors should be allowed, which ones should not be allowed. Some of them are actually youth-friendly and youth-attracting flavors. We're calling for health warnings, for example, as well, because currently those are also lacking. So these are some of the things that we're calling for. We're calling for in terms of where do you use them, because it's not just vape, it's not just water. It still has nicotine, it still has metals. So as a non-user, a person also has a right to breathe in clean air. So these are some of the things that we're calling for e-cigarettes to be regulated.